Hi guys, I hope that you have not gotten too stuck in the weather today and that you have received the email letting you know that this is how we're going to do class today. Just to give you an overview, I'm going to basically start by taking you through the PowerPoint that I would have done in class today, and then I'll be teaching you how to set up the structure for the web-based work that you'll be doing as part of connected to most of the major assignments in ED 352 as we talked about last week. And then lastly, I'll be setting you up for the museum learning activity that you will be doing next week. All right, so I'll take you through this, and basically I'm going to start by going through your responses to Chapter 2. Also, just to give you a sense of how this will be going, is that I'll try and break these up so that I can upload them to YouTube in about 10-minute segments, so that that should work for you. So this segment will talk about summarizing the reading, and just FYI, the people who would have done summarizing the reading for this week, I've switched you to Chapter 9 in April. So just check that class announcement on Educator in order to get that sort of revised schedule. Everybody else is still the same week. It's just the people who would have gone this week are now going to go in April instead. So I'm going to switch over to Microsoft Word. And in here, Diana started us off by talking about, obviously, many of you mentioned the tourist approach that Maxim talks about in this chapter. I think that this is what many of you had seen as one of the most common approaches to teaching, to including cultural diversity in one's classroom, and that when people say, well, I teach social studies, we do Cinco de Mayo, that's what they're talking about. Diana specifically said, I think that celebrating different cultures should happen all school year, and if a teacher discusses with her students about Chinese culture months before the Chinese New Year, the students will be able to appreciate this event more than if you just randomly brought it up one day and then dumped it the next. I've seen teachers, accomplished teachers, who might even pick for their own learning, here's a theme for this entire semester, and this semester we're going to be studying China, or this semester we're going to be studying the countries of the Middle East. And then you might weave together things that it wouldn't necessarily be a huge thematic unit where everything is related to it over the span of a week or 2 weeks or a month, but that you might say, here's another day where we're going to revisit, say, the influence of poetry in Arabic and why that's so important. So anyway, I think that that might be something that you could stick in your minds for when you have your own classroom, and think about different ways that you could do this. It doesn't have to kind of be all or nothing, but I think that that we can all challenge ourselves to move beyond just this tourism approach. Diana, like many other people, made a connection to ED 351 and talking about those process and content standards. One of the ways that you can really think about this is knowing how and knowing what. All right, so Lindsay, I know that you had a question about process and content standards, and that's, if you think about, now I know most of you really know the Wisconsin teaching standards that are broken up onto knowledge, skills, and dispositions, or knowledge, performances, and dispositions. So what do you know? What are you able to do? And what do you believe? So I think that we can not only think about our own dispositional growth, but then that of our students as well. Some of you, I think Maria was talking about making connections to the Alverno abilities, and that would actually inform how she hopes to be as a teacher. So I think you guys can maybe think about that as well. So Lindsay followed up, and she talked about these 4 approaches to incorporating multiculturalism: contributions, additive, transformative, and social action. Like many of you, that social action approach seemed to really resonate with Lindsay. She said that the tiny section that really bothered me was that the teacher was getting criticized for creating a rain dance with her classroom. I'm not saying she was right or wrong to do this, but I'm also not upset that she created this dance with her students. This activity could have been very memorable for some of her students and allowed them to make a connection with Native American history that maybe they had not had before. Was my teacher, I'm speaking as Lindsay, wrong then for simulating the first Thanksgiving, or was Keisha's teacher wrong for simulating the Underground Railroad? After reading this passage, I wondered if social studies is shied away from because teachers do not want to offend anyone. This is something that I think many of you really responded to, and I think it's good for us to recognize that many teachers have that fear. You don't want to offend anyone. You don't want to make anyone feel excluded. But I think it's also good to be mindful of how you do represent something. So when you're thinking about it, I think maybe a good thought experiment is to put it in terms of your culture. So let's just say, Lindsay, that if Lindsay or other people in the class are Catholic, would you feel just as good about, say, a Jewish teacher having her students dress up as a priest and popes and simulate a mass, a Catholic mass? That a sacred sort of religious ritual could be done in ways that are serious, that are grounded in actual explorations of the text, or done in ways that are just kind of performative, surfacey, costumey, and almost dismissive of the important religious underpinnings that might relate to it. So I think there are ways of doing this that are respectful, and there are ways of doing this that are disrespectful, and it's the teacher's job to think about that. I think also just really thinking about, in particular with Thanksgiving, I know many of you mentioned ED 116, and we just had that, I teach that, and last week we just had Deb Ushako represent her experiences growing up Ojibwe in Wisconsin, and she shared that, really some of the history around the first Thanksgiving is actually really not true, and that it's been constructed as this sort of cultural narrative that was developed by some of the people who were perpetrating some of the genocide that the native peoples of the eastern coast of what became the United States, experienced at the hands of the colonists. So I think that what we can really do is continue to educate ourselves. I would really recommend challenging your assumptions, particularly around what you've been taught with history. Some really excellent texts are, it's a kind of funny title, but Lies My Teacher Told Me, and another one called The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, who I know I talked about last week. But both of those texts, I think, are wonderful counterpoints to conventional tellings of American history and can really expand our own understandings of how multiple people might see this. Deb Ushako shared that many Native American people wear black armbands on Thanksgiving because of what that celebration represents for Native peoples. So just important to think about, not only for if you have Native American students in your classroom, but also just to create students who are mindful of that themselves. Let's go on. Evelise then talking about specifically thinking about immigrant students or students who may be undocumented or whose parents may be undocumented, and how that some of the dreams that we hold for our students, particularly around college attendance, may in fact be way more challenging for some students because of the legal status either of themselves or of their parents. There is, I think it's called the DREAM Initiative, which is actually a bill that's proposed that basically says that children shouldn't be penalized for the immigration and documentation decisions of their parents. I think that might be actually, Evelise, a really good current events discussion for you, so maybe tuck that away, because I think that's an opportunity, if you have some expertise in that area, to teach us all about those kinds of issues. Then we have morning meetings. Morning meetings, you saw that I've done that, in fact, with throwing around the stuffed animal in our class. I think that morning meetings or community circles, whatever you're going to call it, are excellent ways to, in fact, build that kind of sense of community. I'm going to pause now because I suspect I'm getting close to 10 minutes, so I'll start my next recording in just a moment.